He just wanted milk for his sister. No begging, no sign. Just a 10-year-old boy with cracked hands and a spray bottle offering to clean a stranger's shoes in exchange for food. Most people ignored him. But one man stopped, a billionaire CEO with polished shoes and an empty heart. What began as a simple offer on a freezing sidewalk unraveled into something no one could have predicted, an unspoken plea that would reshape lives, redefine family, and start a movement that stunned an entire city. Because sometimes saving someone looks a lot like staying. The boy's hands were already chapped from the cold by the time he spotted the man in the suit. He had spent the better part of the morning weaving through traffic on foot, stepping over icy curbs, dodging hurried professionals with their eyes fixed on phone screens, their thoughts far from the sidewalk under their feet. Most didn't even see him. But Liam saw them all. 10 years old, wiry with sharp elbows and a threadbare hoodie, Liam had become something of a ghost in the city's financial district. He wasn't loud. He didn't beg. He had learned that people responded better to quiet desperation than noise. The plastic spray bottle he carried was half full with a homemade solution of vinegar and water, and in his back pocket was a crumpled rag that had once been a white t-shirt. He approached the man carefully. The shoes were what caught his eye first. Italian leather, impossibly clean, polished like they'd never touched a single grain of dirt. They stood out among the scuffed Oxfords and salt-stained boots that populated the street. The man they belonged to stood still as a statue, waiting for his town car, one hand in his coat pocket, the other holding a phone pressed to his ear. Liam swallowed hard, then stepped forward. "Sir, I can clean those for you." The man didn't look up. He continued his conversation, nodding slightly as someone barked instructions on the other end of the call. Liam stayed there half in shadow, waiting. Finally, the man glanced down. Liam straightened. "Your shoes, sir. I can shine them. Just for a little milk. For my sister. She's hungry." The phone lowered. The man looked at him for the first time. He was older than Liam had guessed, maybe mid-50s, silver at the temples, lines around the mouth that weren't from smiling. His eyes were sharp, pale blue, and piercing in a way that made Liam feel both seen and judged at the same time. "Milk?" the man said. Liam nodded. "Just enough for my sister. And maybe some bread if I do a good job." The man stared at him for a long moment. Then he said something no one had ever said to Liam in all the months he'd been surviving on those sidewalks. "Follow me." He turned on his heel and walked toward the black town car, now idling at the curb. The driver stepped out, confused, watching as the sharply dressed man motioned for Liam to get in. Liam hesitated. His breath caught in his throat. This could be a trap, or worse, just a trick. But something about the man's tone left no room for argument. So he climbed in. The car door shut behind him with a quiet finality, and Liam found himself sinking into buttery leather seats that smelled like cedar and cologne. "What's your name?" the man asked, watching him. "Liam." "And how long have you been trading labor for food, Liam?" Liam shrugged. "Since my mom got sick." The man didn't respond right away. Then he tapped on the divider, and the driver pulled out into traffic. "Where do you live?" he asked. Liam looked down. "Wherever's dry." The man nodded once. "And your sister?" "She's 5. We sleep behind the old church sometimes. There's a grate that stays warm." The man exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled. He didn't ask any more questions, just sat there, silently calculating something Liam couldn't begin to guess. 10 minutes later, the car pulled up in front of a glass building that scraped the clouds. People in suits flowed in and out like currents in a river. The man got out. Liam followed. Inside, everything gleamed. Marble floors, crystal elevators. Security guards in dark jackets glanced up as they passed but said nothing. "Where are we going?" Liam asked quietly. The man didn't answer. They rode the elevator in silence to the top floor. When the doors opened, Liam's breath caught. The office beyond the glass was the size of a football field, with panoramic windows overlooking the skyline. It felt like standing in the sky. The man walked to his desk, set down his briefcase, and gestured for Liam to sit on the couch nearby. "Wait here." Liam sat, his hands folded tightly in his lap, his rag still clutched in one hand. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Then the man returned, not with security, not with a police officer, but with a paper bag and a small carton of milk. He handed it to Liam. "Drink, eat, then we'll talk." Liam didn't move at first. The bag in his hands felt heavier than it should have, warm, like it had just come from a real kitchen. He peeked inside and saw a grilled cheese sandwich, cut into triangles, still steaming slightly. Beside it was an apple, bright red and untouched, and the small carton of milk with a paper straw taped to the side. He looked up at the man, unsure. Can I bring her some too?" The man sat in a high-backed chair behind the desk, steepling his fingers. "Eat first, then we'll go see her." Liam's stomach growled in response. That did it. He tore into the sandwich, barely pausing to breathe. The milk followed next, cold and perfect. He didn't speak again until the bag was empty, his fingers greasy, his lips sticky with crumbs and cheese. "Thank you," he whispered. The man nodded. "Do you know who I am?" Liam shook his head. "I'm Mason Rourke, CEO of Rourke International. We're the ones who own that building you were standing in front of, among many others." Liam blinked. He had no idea what any of that meant. "Okay." Mason leaned forward. "And I'm going to ask you one more question. I want you to tell me the truth, Liam. Why didn't you ask for money?" Liam stared at the desk between them. "Because people don't give money. They think I'll waste it." "Would you?" Liam looked up. "Not if I can get milk or bread. My sister likes bread with jam. She says it's a party when we have both." Mason Rourke, the man known across headlines and quarterly earnings calls as the Wolf of Midtown, didn't say anything for a long time. He simply stood, across to the window, and stared out at the glittering cityscape. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. "Call the kitchen. Tell them to prepare a second bag, same order, add extra apples and water bottles, and send a car downstairs. We're going for a drive." Liam's eyes widened. "You're serious?" "I told you we'd go see her." Within 15 minutes, Liam and Mason were back in the car, a new bag of food tucked under Liam's arm. He directed the driver through back streets and alleys until they reached the worn stone steps behind an old cathedral. Near the vent system, tucked under a shallow overhang and shielded by a stack of cardboard, was a little girl curled in a blanket. "Her name's Ellie," Liam said softly. "She's been coughing again." Mason said nothing. He opened the door and stepped out, slow and deliberate, as if approaching a sleeping animal. Liam knelt beside her first. "Ellie, wake up, Elle. I got food." The girl stirred, her eyes fluttering open, red-rimmed and heavy with exhaustion. But the moment she saw her brother, she smiled. "You came back. I told you I would." He pulled out the sandwich and handed it to her. She sat up slowly, coughing once into the blanket, then devoured the first bite like it was the only thing that mattered. Mason stood back, his face unreadable. "How long have you been here?" he asked. Liam looked up. 2 months. Before that, the shelter. Before that, I don't know. My mom used to live in a building with orange walls, but she went away." "She passed?" Liam nodded, barely. Mason exhaled. "And no one found you? No one stepped in?" "I think people tried, but we moved too much, and we didn't want to get split up." Mason looked at them both. The boy with his too-thin coat and his battered shoes, the girl with her cracked lips and oversized hoodie, eating like it was a miracle. He turned to his driver. "Call my assistant. Tell her to meet us at St. Bridget's Pediatric Unit in 20 minutes. Full intake. Prepare a room." Liam's head snapped up. "The hospital?" "Your sister needs care. You both do. I'm not asking permission, Liam. I'm making sure you don't sleep another night on concrete." Ellie looked between them, confused. Are we in trouble? No, sweetheart, Mason said gently. You're going to be okay now. They rode in silence. Ellie fell asleep on Liam's shoulder, her small body still fragile, but finally at rest. Mason stared out the window the entire ride, jaw clenched, mind racing. He hadn't meant to get involved. He never did. His job was to make money, build things, win. That was the game. But something about that boy, standing on a freezing sidewalk, offering to clean a stranger's shoes for milk, had cut through every layer of armor he'd built over the years. By the time they reached the hospital, Mason had already put things in motion. A private pediatrician met them at the ER entrance. Nurses were ready. A room had been prepared on the top floor. Liam hesitated before stepping inside. She won't like it if I'm not there. You'll stay together, Mason assured him. And after? Liam whispered. What happens when we're better? Mason looked at him. That, he said, is what we're going to figure out next. The pediatric wing of St. Bridget's was nothing like the places Liam and Ellie had slept before. There were no cold floors, no coughing strangers, no mildew creeping up the walls. Instead, the room smelled faintly of citrus disinfectant and fresh laundry. The bed was soft. The sheets were warm. A nurse with a gentle voice helped Ellie out of her dirty clothes and into a clean hospital gown, her hands moving with the kind of care that made Liam's throat tighten. Ellie barely woke when they laid her on the bed. She mumbled something about strawberry jam and fell asleep within seconds, her small hand clutching Liam's fingers until even that softened into rest. Mason stood in the hallway, watching through the glass. His phone buzzed, texts, missed calls, a calendar notification about a shareholder luncheon. He ignored all of it. The doctor approached quietly. She's dehydrated, malnourished, anemia, early respiratory infection, but we caught it early enough. She'll be okay. Mason nodded, his voice low. And the boy? Better than expected, considering what he's been through. His blood pressure's a little low. He's got a few bruises, probably from sleeping rough, but nothing we can't fix. Mason stared into the room. And the rest? The paperwork? We've contacted family services, but the doctor hesitated. Mr. Rourke, the truth is, these kids have fallen through every crack in the system. No records, no open case files. They're invisible. Not anymore, Mason said. The next morning, when Liam woke, Ellie was sitting up in bed, sipping juice from a straw and watching cartoons with wide, amazed eyes. She looked brighter already, her skin a little less pale, her energy returning. Morning, she said. They gave me socks, with the little rubber things on the bottom. Liam smiled. Told you rich people hospitals were fancy. At that, the door opened, and Mason stepped in. He was dressed casually today, no suit, no tie, just slacks and a dark sweater. Still polished, still composed, but somehow different. How are we feeling? He asked, stopping at the edge of the bed. Ellie grinned. Like royalty. Mason chuckled. Good answer. Liam, can I talk to you outside? Liam followed him into the hallway, unsure what was coming next. I've been making some calls, Mason said. There are two ways this can go. The state can take custody, split you two up, place you in the foster system, or... He trailed off. Liam's eyes narrowed. Or what? Mason exhaled. Or I can take responsibility. Not officially, not right away. But I can sponsor you, cover your medical care, housing, schooling, keep you together. Liam's heart thudded in his chest. Why would you do that? Mason looked at him. Because when I was your age, I offered to carry someone's groceries in a parking lot for a loaf of bread, and he told me I didn't need to work to be worth something. Liam stared. Did he help you? Yes, and I never forgot it. Liam bit his lip. So now you're doing it for us? I am, Mason said. But only if you say yes. Liam turned to look at the room, at Ellie in her hospital bed, smiling as a nurse braided her hair. At the breakfast tray covered in food they didn't have to steal. At the sunlight streaming through the window like a promise. Then he looked back at Mason. Yes, he said. Mason nodded once. Then let's go home. The apartment Mason set them up with was modest by his standards, but luxurious by Liam's. 2 bedrooms, real furniture, a working heater. The fridge was full. The closet had clothes in Ellie's size. A soft pink blanket had been folded at the foot of her bed. On the first night, after Ellie had fallen asleep, Liam wandered into the living room, where Mason was quietly typing something on a laptop. "You don't have to stay here," Liam said. "I know," Mason replied, "but I want to." Liam nodded. "You're not what I thought rich people were." Mason smiled faintly. "Neither are you, kid." That weekend, Mason took Liam shopping, not for clothes or toys, but for school supplies, notebooks, pencils, a backpack with both their names stitched inside. At checkout, the clerk smiled at them. "Getting ready for the first day?" "Something like that," Mason said. Liam said nothing. But later, in the car, he whispered, "No one's ever bought me paper before." Mason didn't reply. He just kept driving. On Monday morning, Ellie bounced out of the apartment in a new coat with buttons shaped like stars. Liam followed, holding her hand. Mason drove them to the school district office himself, handling the paperwork, answering the questions, making sure the siblings would be placed in the same school, the same classrooms. By noon, they were registered. By the end of the week, they were attending. And by the end of the month, the city had started whispering. It began with a teacher at Liam's new school who recognized Mason at pickup, then a parent at the grocery store who saw him walking out with a carton of milk, and a little girl in a star coat holding his hand. Then a journalist caught wind of a rumor. The CEO of one of the most powerful real estate firms in the city had unofficially taken custody of 2 homeless children. "What's the story?" the reporter asked, voice eager. "Is it true?" Mason paused. "The only story here is that no one helped them before now." "But why you?" Mason met the reporter's gaze. "Because they offered me something I'd forgotten existed. A second chance." The article ran the next day. The city was stunned. And for the first time in decades, Mason Rourke, the wolf of Midtown, wasn't the subject of headlines about market shares or lawsuits or high-stakes acquisitions. He was the man who said yes to a boy, to a girl, to love. The article spread like wildfire. It wasn't the usual business section fluff or an exposé filled with veiled jabs. It was real, honest. A front-page piece with a photo of Mason walking hand-in-hand with Liam and Ellie down the front steps of the school. No suits, no entourage. Just a man who had stopped in the middle of a billion-dollar day to listen to a hungry boy with a rag in his hand and hope in his voice. The city reacted with disbelief at first. Mason Rourke, the notoriously unreachable CEO with a reputation for being colder than the lobby marble of Rourke International, had taken 2 street kids under his wing, had moved them into an apartment, enrolled them in school, paid their medical bills. But then came the ripple effect. Emails flooded the foundation's inbox. Letters poured into the school. People reached out, some with offers of donations, others with stories of their own. A neighbor in need, a student sleeping in the library, a single mom working 3 jobs to keep the lights on. And with every message, Mason grew quieter, less the businessman, more the man who now waited at the school gates at 3:15 every afternoon, holding Ellie's pink backpack and Liam's latest math quiz in one hand. Inside their apartment, the routine was simple but sacred. Homework at the table, dinner at 6. Ellie's bath followed by stories, some from books, some from Mason's memory. She liked the ones where he was the hero least of all. She preferred the ones where Liam saved the day, or where she did. One evening, after Ellie had gone to bed and the dishes had been cleared, Liam stood on the small balcony just outside the living room, watching the city shimmer. Mason joined him after a few minutes. "You good?" Mason asked. Liam nodded. "I think so." They stood in silence for a moment. "Do you ever miss your old life?" Liam asked finally. "The big office, the boardrooms, the whatever rich people do all day?" Mason leaned on the railing. Sometimes, but I never realized how quiet it was, how lonely. Liam glanced at him. Even with all that stuff? Especially with all that stuff. Liam chewed on his lip. Do you think this is permanent? Mason turned to him. You mean us? Liam nodded. I didn't take you in so I could feel like a better person. I took you in because you offered me something that no one else ever has. What? Mason smiled. A reason to come home. That night, while Mason worked on his laptop at the kitchen counter, he heard a quiet thud and turned to see Liam setting something down beside him. It was a shoebox. Inside were the only things Liam had saved from the months on the street. A crumpled photo of their mother, a cracked comb, a broken watch that no longer ticked, and the spray bottle he'd once carried like it was his job. I was going to throw it out, Liam said, voice small, but I think I want to remember where we started. Mason stared at the box for a long moment. Then he closed the lid gently. Then we'll keep it, he said, not because it defines you, but because it shows how far you've come. The next day, Mason did something unthinkable. He stepped down. Not completely, not publicly, but enough. Enough. He handed over the day-to-day operations of Rourke International to his executive team, shocking shareholders and rivals alike. He said he was focusing on long-term legacy and community development. What he meant was Liam and Ellie. He kept his office but used it less. He launched a new division within the company focused solely on transitional housing initiatives, an effort to turn unused commercial spaces into temporary shelter. Liam sat beside him the day he pitched it to the board. Ellie colored a butterfly in the corner, while grown men in $1,000 suits leaned in, listening like every word was scripture. It passed unanimously. That weekend, the mayor called, then the governor. Mason declined interviews, but when the local news asked for a family photo to accompany a segment on the program's launch, he said yes. The photo was simple. The three of them on the front steps of their apartment. Mason in jeans and a sweatshirt. Liam in a t-shirt that read, "Kindness is cool." Ellie in overalls, holding Mr. Sprinkles, the stuffed rabbit she'd been given at the hospital. No glitz, no polish, just a family. Weeks turned into months. Ellie aced her reading assessments. Liam wrote a short story that was selected for the school's year-end magazine. They made friends, they made pancakes, they went to the museum, they went to the dentist. They argued over who got the last apple. They danced in the kitchen. They learned that love didn't always come loudly. Sometimes it came in the form of a man who didn't flinch when you asked for milk, and who stayed long after you stopped needing to. In the quiet of early spring, something changed, not in their home, which remained filled with warmth and rhythm, but in the way the outside world began to view them. They were no longer just a footnote in a viral news cycle or a feature in the community section. They were becoming a symbol, and Mason could feel the weight of it. Liam and Ellie had grown into it gradually. Liam's shyness began to give way to something firmer. He walked with straighter shoulders, spoke with more confidence. He had started tutoring younger students at school, kids like him who once struggled to stay awake during class because their nights were too loud, too cold, too unsafe. Ellie joined the school's kindness club. She hand-wrote welcome cards for every new student, and when asked why, she said, "Because someone once made me feel like I belonged, and I want to do that for someone else." Cole sat in the back of the classroom the day she said it, invited by her teacher as a surprise. He hadn't meant to cry, but he did, just for a second. Then there was the gala. The foundation Mason had created, the Rourke Initiative for Youth Recovery, had grown beyond even his quiet expectations. In 6 months, it had secured funding for 3 family transitional shelters, partnered with school districts to identify at-risk youth, and even launched a mobile pantry network run by volunteers, many of whom had once needed those same services. The gala was meant to be a celebration, but for Mason, it was also a confrontation with a past he had long kept buried. He stood backstage in the hotel ballroom watching the crowd gather beyond the velvet curtain. He wore a tux, though he hated it. Ellie had chosen his tie. It was a soft powder blue, and she said it made him look like a kind president. Liam appeared beside him, holding a small stack of index cards. "You don't have to give the speech," Liam said. "I mean, I could, if you're scared." Mason smirked. "I've delivered quarterly reports to Fortune 500 boards. I think I can handle a room full of donors and journalists." Liam looked at him sideways. "But you've never told them about us." That was true. Tonight would be the first time he shared the real story. Not the polished version, not the filtered corporate-safe narrative, but the real one. About a boy with cracked hands and eyes too old for his age. About a little girl with a cough and a blanket that wasn't warm enough. About a man who didn't believe in redemption until it looked him in the eye and asked to clean his shoes. Mason stepped to the podium. The room quieted. He didn't read from the cards. He didn't look at the teleprompter. He just spoke. There are things in this life that make us feel powerful. Titles, money, recognition. I've had all of those. But none of them ever made me feel human. He paused. Then one day, a boy stopped me on the sidewalk. He offered to shine my shoes in exchange for milk. Not for himself, but for his sister. That moment should have broken me. Instead, it woke me up. He glanced toward the front table where Liam sat with his chin held high, and Ellie clutched her rabbit in her lap. "I don't tell you this story because I want praise. I tell it because there are thousands of other Liams out there, and not all of them find someone willing to listen." The room was silent, save for the occasional sniffle or soft sigh. "When we talk about change," Mason continued, "we usually talk about policies, programs, numbers. But change is personal. It's small. It starts with noticing someone you've been trained to ignore." He looked down at Liam and smiled. "And letting them change you." The crowd rose to their feet. Afterward, reporters swarmed, investors applauded, and city leaders offered their endorsements. But Mason only cared about one thing: the look in Liam's eyes, not just pride, but peace. "You did it," Liam whispered as they left the ballroom later that night. "No," Mason said. "We did." Back at the apartment, Ellie fell asleep on the ride home, her head on Mason's shoulder. Liam curled in beside her. The city lights blurred past the windows as the car moved quietly through the streets. Mason looked out at the skyline, the same one he once ruled from behind glass, and realized that somewhere along the way, he had stopped building empires and started building something far more difficult: a family. And in the end, it was the only legacy that truly mattered. The days that followed the gala were quieter, almost reverent in their normalcy. Mason returned to school, pick up like nothing had changed. Ellie ran out first, her backpack bouncing, her arms outstretched. Liam followed a minute later, a little more subdued, as middle school had started layering his emotions in new ways. But Mason didn't miss the flicker of pride in the boy's eyes. He had heard the speech. He had seen the standing ovation. He knew in some growing part of himself that their story now belonged to the city, but their bond belonged to no one else. News crews tried to camp near their building, hoping for a glimpse of the CEO's kids, but Mason made it clear through firm channels they were off limits. This was a family, not a headline. The press eventually moved on, chasing shinier distractions. But the people who mattered, the social workers, the volunteers, the foster parents, the teachers, kept talking. Not about Mason's wealth, but about his choice. About the way he chose to stay. To keep showing up. To parent like it was his purpose. One afternoon, Ellie brought home a drawing she made in class. It showed a large man in a business suit with a blue tie, holding hands with two stick figures, one with messy hair and a spray bottle, and the other with big round eyes and a bunny in her backpack. Over them, in crayon-colored letters, was the phrase, "Our Forever." Mason kept it in a frame on his desk. As spring pressed into summer, Liam joined a community leadership program. He started speaking at local schools just once a month, telling his story not with pity, but with purpose. He spoke calmly, steadily, explaining how easy it was to become invisible when no one wants to see you. How survival was about more than food, it was about hope. And how Mason hadn't saved him exactly. He'd simply made room. "It's not about rescue," Liam told a group of sixth graders one day. "It's about recognizing someone's still in there, even when the world's forgotten them." Ellie's milestones were different. Smaller, but no less meaningful. She joined the choir. She won a spelling bee. She planted a single sunflower in a plastic pot and insisted that everyone say good morning to it like a family pet. She called it Roxy. Roxy bloomed in late July. At home, the routine remained sacred. Sunday pancakes, Friday night puzzles, Tuesday evening walks to the corner bookstore where Mason let the kids pick one thing each, even if it was just a notebook or a sticker. On the walk back, Ellie usually asked impossible questions like, "Do you think the moon gets lonely?" Or, "If someone is lost but doesn't know it, are they still waiting to be found?" Mason never had perfect answers, but he always tried. One morning, Liam approached him in the kitchen. His face was serious, older. "Do you think we should change our name?" Mason paused. "You mean legally?" Liam nodded. "It's not because I don't want to remember. I do. I want to remember Mom and everything that came before. But I want to belong to this too, all the way." Ellie peeked around the hallway, her eyes wide. "Can I be Rourke too?" Mason swallowed, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. Not in a bad way, but in a way that made everything before it feel like a prelude. "Only if it's what you both want," he said. They looked at each other, then at him. "We want it," Liam said. "We're ready." The paperwork took time. Appointments, hearings, letters from caseworkers, and follow-up visits. Mason handled all of it without hesitation. When the court date arrived, they all dressed up. Ellie in a yellow sundress, Liam in the same button-down shirt he'd worn to his first public talk. Mason wore the powder blue tie again. He said it was for luck. Ellie said it was because it matched his eyes when he was happy. The courtroom was quiet, ceremonial. The judge asked a few questions. Mason answered with a steady voice and a full heart. He spoke of guardianship not as obligation, but as devotion. He spoke of his kids, and how they had rebuilt him, not the other way around. When the final signature was scrawled across the bottom of the form, the judge smiled. "Welcome home, Rourke family." Ellie clapped. Liam smiled. Mason sat back, his arms draped over their shoulders, and whispered, "We've been home for a long time. This just made it official." That evening, they returned to the apartment. The three of them sat on the balcony, watching the lights flicker to life across the skyline. Ellie leaned against Mason, her hand still gripping the court form like it might fly away in the wind. "Does this mean we get a family crest?" she asked. Liam smirked. "You just want an excuse to draw swords. I was thinking more like rabbits and books." "Still very on brand," Mason said. They laughed. Below them, the city pulsed, loud, relentless, alive. Somewhere out there, another child stood on a sidewalk, heart pounding, eyes desperate, holding a rag or a sign or nothing at all. Mason thought about them, always would. But tonight his arms were full, and his heart was steady, because the boy who once offered to clean a stranger's shoes for a carton of milk had found something bigger than survival. He had found permanence. He had found home. He had found his name. The official name change was celebrated not with a press release or a televised interview, but with ice cream. Not the fancy kind from a boutique parlor, but soft serve from the corner truck that parked across the street every summer afternoon, its jingle slightly off-key, its cones handed out by a grinning man named Artie who always slipped extra sprinkles on Ellie's cup. She chose vanilla with strawberry swirl. Liam went with chocolate dipped in cherry shell. Mason ordered black and white twist in a cup and let the kids argue over which topping was superior. They sat together on a park bench across from their building, watching the city move around them, unnoticed by most, and that was just how they wanted it. At some point, Ellie leaned her head against Mason's arm. "So, does this mean I get to call you Dad now?" Mason stilled. He looked at her, soft eyes and sticky fingers, and nodded. "If you want to." "I do." Liam licked his spoon. "I've already been calling you that in my head since Christmas." Mason blinked. He hadn't expected that confession to hit him so hard, but there it was, laid bare under a setting sun and melting sugar. "I like the sound of it," he said, voice quiet. "A lot." From that moment on, the word became normal, not forced, not ceremonial, just natural. Ellie yelled it across the room when she couldn't find her sock. Liam muttered it with a smile when Mason corrected his math homework. Mason heard it in his sleep, in his waking moments. In the spaces between the past and the future he now walked inside of, hand in hand with two kids who had once belonged to no one. The Rourke Initiative continued to grow. What had started as a direct response to one boy's hunger had evolved into a city-wide movement. Buildings long abandoned were turned into learning centers. Mobile medical vans were deployed to serve families living in transitional housing. Community kitchens, legal support clinics, job placement programs, all built under the same philosophy: start by seeing people, then stay. Mason never put his name on the signs. He refused interviews. He let the work speak for itself, and in time, the public began to follow. CEOs who once ignored the city's silent children began allocating real dollars. Schools launched new family outreach teams. Other cities called to replicate the model. But through it all, Mason's home remained sacred, untouched by headlines, grounded in the routines that had changed everything. Ellie's growing collection of bedtime books, Liam's homemade lasagna that was always slightly overcooked, the crooked frame on the hallway wall holding their first family photo, the one where Ellie had blinked and Mason had smiled for the first time in a long time. Late one summer night, Mason found Liam on the balcony, sitting cross-legged with a notebook in his lap and a pencil tucked behind his ear. "Couldn't sleep?" Mason asked, pulling up a chair. Liam shook his head. "Too many thoughts." "Want to talk about them?" Liam hesitated. Then, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't asked you that day?" "Every day?" Liam turned a page in his notebook. "Me too." "But I think it was always going to happen," Mason added. "We were always going to find each other." Liam looked at him then. "You think that's how fate works?" Mason smiled. "I think sometimes the universe doesn't need to shout. It just places the right people in front of you. The rest is choice." Liam stared at the skyline, the windows lit like stars. "Do you ever miss your old life, Ma?" he asked. Mason thought for a moment. "Not even a little." They sat in silence, the kind of silence built not from discomfort but from closeness, from knowing that words weren't always necessary when trust had been built brick by brick. After a while, Liam handed Mason the notebook. Inside were pages filled with sketches, notes, beginnings of a story. "A graphic novel," Liam explained, "based on truth, with some fiction mixed in. A boy, a sister, a CEO with polished shoes and an empty heart. And what happened when all three collided?" The title on the first page read, "The Man Who Stayed." Mason's throat tightened. "It's your story," Liam said, "but it's ours too." Mason closed the book gently. "It's the best story I've ever read." In the days that followed, Ellie started learning how to ride a bike. Mason ran beside her, out of breath, laughing and stumbling through the grass as she wobbled across the park's path. When she finally pedaled a full circle without falling, she threw her hands in the air and screamed, "I'm flying!" Liam recorded the whole thing. They watched it that night on the couch, huddled under blankets, laughing until they couldn't breathe. And when the video ended, Mason looked at them, his daughter and his son, and realized something he hadn't dared to admit even now. He was happy, truly, deeply happy, not because he had fixed something, but because he had chosen to stay long enough to help something grow. That evening, before bed, Ellie crawled into Mason's lap with Mr. Sprinkles under her arm. "Can I ask you something?" she whispered. "Anything." "Do you think Mom would have liked you?" Mason didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, "I think she would have loved you enough to make sure you found someone who'd never let you go." Ellie smiled. "Good, because we're never letting you go either." Fall arrived with its own kind of magic, the slow turning of leaves to gold, the smell of wood smoke drifting between buildings, the way the sidewalks glistened after the first evening rain. In their apartment, the season brought new routines. Ellie decorating every flat surface with painted leaves and construction paper pumpkins, Liam switching his morning cereal to oatmeal because it feels more serious, and Mason learning how to bake banana bread, which he often burned, though no one dared complain. Their lives, once built on survival, now moved with the kind of steady rhythm that only came with safety. It wasn't about perfection. It never had been. There were still mornings when Ellie cried because her shoes didn't match, or Liam slammed his door because middle school was a minefield. There were bills, busy days, and the fatigue that sometimes settled in Mason's shoulders after long hours at the foundation. But there was laughter, too. There were board games left half-finished on the dining table, spontaneous dance-offs in the kitchen, the nightly tradition of saying 3 good things before bed, and every Friday a standing appointment at the same diner around the corner where the waitress knew them by name, and Ellie was allowed exactly 1 extra syrup refill for her pancakes. One crisp evening, they visited the community center Mason had helped build, the original location that stood on the block where Liam had first approached him. The sidewalk had been repaved, the walls painted a cheerful blue. A garden now grew where broken glass once littered the ground. Inside, a youth art exhibit lined the walls, each piece telling a different story. Liam's was at the center. It was a large charcoal drawing, framed in oak, titled "Before and After." On the left side, a boy kneeling on cracked pavement, holding a rag in one hand and a spray bottle in the other. On the right, the same boy, older, standing tall with a child holding each of his hands, one laughing, the other pointing toward the sky. Mason stared at it for a long time. He hadn't known Liam was submitting something, hadn't expected to see his story, their story, laid bare in such clean lines and stark contrast. When he turned, Liam was watching him. "You okay?" the boy asked. Mason nodded, eyes misted. "I just didn't know you saw me that clearly." Liam shrugged. "You saw us first." That night they walked home under the rustling trees, Ellie skipping ahead, her cheeks flushed pink, arms swinging. "We're going to be okay forever," she announced. Liam rolled his eyes. "There's no such thing as okay forever." Mason smiled. "Maybe not. But there's such a thing as always choosing each other, no matter what." Like Ellie said, "Even when I spill juice on your keyboard?" "Even then. Even if Liam listens to weird music?" "Especially then." She giggled, then added, "Even if you burn banana bread again?" Mason laughed. "Especially that." Back at the apartment, they lit candles, curled under blankets, and read books aloud until Ellie fell asleep with her head in Liam's lap. Mason carried her to bed, tucking her in gently. Liam stood in the doorway, watching. "You know," Liam whispered, "sometimes I don't even remember the cold anymore." Mason turned to him. "That's a good thing." "Yeah, but I don't want to forget it either. It's what makes all this feel real." He paused, then added, "That night I stopped you. It wasn't about the milk." Mason looked at him, curious. "No?" Liam shook his head. "It was about not disappearing." Mason walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You were never invisible, Liam. Not to me." The next morning, Ellie woke up early and ran into the living room clutching a piece of folded paper. She handed it to Mason without a word. He opened it slowly. It was a drawing of their apartment, their crooked bookshelf, their coffee mugs, Liam's hoodie slung over the couch. In the center, the three of them sat at the table, heads close, smiling. On top she'd written in block letters, "The happiest place I know." Mason stared at it for a long time. He didn't speak. He just gathered both of them close, arms tight around their small bodies, and let himself feel the full, unshakable weight of what they had built. He had once been a man with towers and titles. Now he was something more. He was a father. He was theirs. And that made him the richest man in the city. By December, the city was draped in light, windows outlined in electric gold, lampposts wrapped with red bows, trees strung with bulbs that blinked in slow, rhythmic pulses. Snow had not yet fallen, but the chill in the air carried the promise of it. Ellie had started wearing her scarf indoors, just in case, and Liam had taken to measuring the temperature every morning with a small weather station Mason had bought him after a particularly enthusiastic science project. Mason found himself slowing down more often, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to notice things. The way Ellie drew tiny hearts on the corners of her math homework. How Liam always made exactly 2 extra pancakes and left them in foil for Mason, just in case you're hungry when you get back. He noticed the sound of their feet racing across the floor when he came home, the way their voices called out, "Dad," like it still surprised them to be able to say it. He noticed, too, how their faces changed when they saw their names printed on envelopes, official ones, report cards, medical updates, even junk mail. Rourke. It had taken months, hearings, paperwork, but it was real now. They had the same name, a shared one, not borrowed, not temporary. Their holiday plans were modest by any standard. Mason didn't go in for glittering trees or 12-course dinners. What they did instead was decorate their small artificial tree with ornaments they made themselves, buttons, ribbon, pipe cleaner candy canes. Ellie strung popcorn garlands with alarming precision. Liam made a star out of cardboard and spray paint, and when it finally dried, Mason lifted him onto his shoulders so he could place it on top. On Christmas morning, they opened gifts slowly, unwrapping them one at a time, laughing more than cheering. There were no grand reveals, no luxury brand surprises, but there was a box of new drawing pencils for Liam, wrapped in a scarf Ellie had knitted in secret. There was a journal for Mason, the first page already filled by Ellie in her neatest handwriting. For all the stories we haven't told yet. There was a frame, too, hand-painted, slightly crooked. Inside it, a printed photo of the three of them sitting on the park bench, ice cream cones in hand, sunlight slanting across their faces. The caption, scrawled beneath it in marker, read, "The day everything started." Mason didn't speak, just pulled them both into a hug that lasted longer than it needed to. Later that week, after the wrapping paper had been cleared and the leftovers tucked away, they went back to the neighborhood where it all began. Not because they had to, because they wanted to. The old sidewalk was still cracked. The corner store had a new sign. The pawn shop had closed. Mason stood in the spot where Liam had first approached him. The city buzzed around them, oblivious. "You were right there," Mason said softly, pointing. Liam nodded. "You were facing the street. I almost didn't say anything." Ellie held Mason's hand. "But you did. I just thought maybe you'd look at me." "I did," Mason said, "and I never stopped." They stood there for a long time. Eventually, Ellie tugged on his sleeve. "Can we go home now?" "Yeah," Mason said, wrapping an arm around each of them. "Let's go home." And they did. They went back to their warm apartment, their mugs of cocoa, their stack of board games, back to their routines, their memories, their tiny daily miracles. They went back to the life they had built together, not all at once, not overnight, but piece by piece, with love and patience, and the kind of quiet faith that survives even the coldest streets. And if someone had asked Mason Rourke, not the CEO but the father, what his greatest investment had ever been, he would have answered without hesitation, a boy, a carton of milk, and the decision to stay. Winter deepened, wrapping the city in silence. The first real snow arrived in mid-January, falling in slow, heavy flakes that turned the world soft and clean. The streets became quieter. Everything moved slower, except for the kids. Ellie was the first to dart outside, bundled in her star-patterned coat and 3 scarves, determined to catch a snowflake on her tongue. Liam followed behind, more reserved, but grinning in that crooked, unmistakably Rourke way as he lobbed the first snowball directly at her shoulder. Mason watched from the window, his coffee cooling in his hand, his chest warm with something that had no name except, "This is what it means to have everything." He joined them eventually, giving in to Ellie's demands that he stop being a grown-up for 1 hour. They built a lopsided snowman. Mason taught Liam how to pack snow properly to build a fort. Ellie made snow angels until her cheeks were pink and her laughter turned breathless. They stayed outside until their fingers tingled and their teeth chattered, then rushed inside for hot chocolate with whipped cream that Ellie insisted on measuring by the inch. That evening, as the wind howled beyond the windows, they curled under one blanket on the couch watching old movies. Liam's feet stretched across Mason's lap. Ellie tucked her head beneath Mason's arm. The TV flickered softly, but none of them were really watching. It was the comfort they liked, the togetherness. At one point, Liam glanced at Mason and said, "You ever think about writing your story?" Mason smiled. "You mean like yours, comic book style?" "No," Liam said. "Not as a hero, just you, the real you. What happened before us? How you got lost? How you found your way back?" Mason looked at him. "You think people would care?" "I think the ones who need it would," Ellie piped up from beneath the blanket. "We could call it milk money." They laughed, all of them. It wasn't the first time Ellie had suggested a title for their lives, and it wouldn't be the last. The next morning, Mason pulled a fresh journal from his desk drawer, the one Ellie had given him at Christmas. He opened it to the first clean page and wrote, "There once was a boy who asked for milk and offered to clean a man's shoes. But what he gave, without knowing, was a future, a name, a reason." He wrote until his hand ached, not for the world, not for a publisher, but for them. The family continued to evolve. Ellie outgrew her pink boots. Liam started saving up for a camera. Mason learned how to make lasagna, badly but earnestly. They argued sometimes, like any family, over chores, bedtimes, forgotten assignments. But the love never faltered. It lived in the walls of their home now, in the photos on the fridge, in the echo of Ellie's laughter down the hallway, in the steady tap of Liam's pencil against his desk when he was thinking. One Friday evening, Mason came home with a box under his arm. "What is it?" Liam asked. "Something I've been working on." They opened it together. Inside was a draft of a children's book, fully illustrated, simple words. A story told through images. A boy, a girl, a man in a suit, a city that didn't stop at a bench, a meal, a hand extended, not in charity, but in choice. On the final page, a single sentence. "Sometimes, saving someone looks a lot like staying." Ellie stared at the drawings, wide-eyed. "You made this?" Mason nodded. "It's not just mine, it's ours." Liam turned the pages slowly, reverently. "I want to read it at school," he said, "for Story Day." Mason raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" Liam nodded. "Yeah, because it's not about being poor, it's about being seen." When he read it to his class the following week, his teacher cried. 2 students raised their hands and asked to talk to the counselor about their home situations. That night, Mason got an email from the principal asking if the book would be made available for other schools. "It's not just a story," the email read, "it's a map." Mason didn't know what to say. But when he showed Liam and Ellie the message, they knew. "It's working," Ellie said. "People are paying attention." Liam added, "We're not the only ones anymore." And they weren't. Because what began with a boy and a pair of shoes had become something far bigger. An idea, a movement, a legacy. A quiet revolution built not on speeches, but on action, on family, and always, always on love. Spring returned to the city with gentle persistence. Buds pressing out of winter-numbed branches, puddles forming where snow once piled, and sunlight lingering a little longer on the buildings each evening. The warmth seemed to wake everyone up again, including Ellie, who began every morning now by singing to her sunflower seeds in little starter pots by the window. Liam had found an old camera at a thrift shop and spent his weekends photographing the corners of the city no one noticed, peeling murals, quiet alley gardens, the patterns in sidewalk cracks. Mason had started rising earlier, too. He'd jogged the same path Liam used to walk when he was searching for a way to feed his sister, and not once did he make it to the end without remembering. Not out of guilt, but gratitude. That street had changed, because of them, because of that moment. One afternoon in April, Mason was invited to a youth summit at City Hall. He hadn't planned to bring the kids. He hated putting them in front of cameras or making them feel like mascots for something that should have stayed sacred. But Liam insisted. "We should be there," he said. "If we're going to keep changing things, people need to see where it started." So they went. The auditorium wasn't massive, but it was packed. Teachers, teens, social workers, city officials. The mayor sat in the front row. Mason wore a navy suit with the same blue tie Ellie had once picked out. Liam wore a shirt with rolled sleeves and a patch of paint on the elbow he'd forgotten about. Ellie wore her sunflower pin and a lanyard that read, "Youth Advocate." Mason was the final speaker. He didn't take the stage alone. He stood with Liam and Ellie on either side of him, holding the book he'd written in one hand and Ellie's in the other. He didn't read from a script. He told the story of a boy who asked for milk, of a sister who waited with quiet bravery, of a man too used to walking past people without seeing them, of what happened when, one day, he stopped. When he finished, Liam stepped forward and said into the mic, "You can save a life just by noticing it." Ellie added, "And you can change the world by staying." The applause didn't end quickly. Afterward, people came up one by one to thank them. Young people asked how they could get involved. A teacher asked to share the book with every classroom in her school. A nonprofit executive offered to help fund a new round of housing programs. They didn't just listen, they acted. That night, the three of them sat on the fire escape with ice cream sandwiches, watching the city blink to life beneath them. "Do you think this is what Mom would have wanted?" Ellie asked softly. Mason looked at her, brushing a curl behind her ear. "I think this is what she gave her life for." Liam added, "And I think she'd be proud we never stopped building." In May, Mason turned 54. He didn't want a party, just a day with the kids. They made breakfast, played cards, walked to the park. Ellie gifted him a rock she'd painted gold with the words, "Best Dad Ever, even when you burn toast." Liam gave him a photo album. The first page was a picture of the three of them from their first month together. The last page was blank. "For what comes next," Liam said. What came next was more of the same, but richer. Longer days, homework and dinners and jokes and soft arguments about who got to sit in the front seat. Ellie's sunflowers bloomed. Liam entered an art contest and won first place. Mason accidentally adopted a cat they named Button. And then, one morning, Liam found Mason in the kitchen, coffee in hand, staring out the window like he hadn't moved in a while. "What are you thinking about?" Liam asked. Mason took a long breath. "I'm thinking it's time." "For what?" "To write the second book." Liam grinned. "What'll it be called?" Mason smiled slowly. "The Boy Who Stayed." Liam nodded. "That's a good one." Ellie poked her head into the room. "Will it have pictures?" "All your drawings," Mason said, "and Liam's photos." She gasped. Can we put in the family pancake recipe?" Liam groaned. "It's just flour and chaos." "That's the point." Mason laughed, and something in his chest, something quiet and sacred, settled. Years ago, he had been a man too busy to notice a boy with a rag and a plea. Now, he was a father, a writer, a builder of second chances, and all because he stopped, because he listened, because he stayed. Summer came again, as it always did, but this time it brought more than warmth. It brought reflection, growth, a sense that something big, had not only been survived, but transformed into something rare and lasting. Liam finished middle school at the top of his class. He gave a speech at the promotion ceremony, not because anyone expected him to, but because his principal had quietly asked if he'd consider it. He stood on the small gymnasium stage, collar too tight, eyes scanning the crowd, until they landed on Mason and Ellie in the front row. "I used to think survival was enough," he began. "But then someone gave me a place to rest, and I realized I wanted more than safety. I wanted joy. I wanted permanence. I wanted a name." He paused. The crowd held its breath. "I found all of that. And I know now that the hardest part of life isn't being alone. It's believing no one will ever choose you. But someone did. And that made all the difference." He stepped off stage to a standing ovation. Mason couldn't clap at first. He was too stunned by the tears in his eyes and the pride pulling his chest open like light. Ellie held his hand the entire time. Later they went out for ice cream, their tradition, now permanent. They toasted Liam with spoons instead of champagne, and Ellie made a paper crown out of napkins and declared him most likely to melt everyone's heart. That night, Mason found Liam in the hallway, staring at the drawing Ellie had given them the Christmas before, the one with their tiny apartment, crooked and perfect, labeled "The Happiest Place I Know." "She got it right," Liam said quietly. "This place, this life, it's everything." Mason nodded, stepping beside him. "We built it together. You think people like us, kids who've seen too much too early, do you think we get to keep happy endings?" Mason was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I don't believe in endings, just chapters. And this one? This is the one where we live." A few weeks later, on a clear July morning, Mason stood in front of a packed auditorium, this time not as a keynote speaker or a CEO, but as a father. He was there to unveil the new initiative in partnership with the city, a youth center named the Rourke House, not for himself, he told the crowd, but for the two kids who made him worthy of the name. The building would include a transitional shelter, a health clinic, classrooms, gardens, and family units. More importantly, it would offer something far rarer than temporary aid. It would offer consistency, mentorship, visibility, a place where no child would ever have to offer their pride in exchange for milk. As he spoke, Ellie and Liam stood beside him, holding the ceremonial ribbon. The moment it was cut, a cheer erupted, not because of the spectacle, but because of the story behind it, because people had watched something extraordinary grow from a single act of courage, a single boy, a single moment. That evening, they went home, their real home. The lights glowed softly in the windows. Dinner was waiting on the table. Ellie had made pasta, Liam had oversalted the garlic bread, and Mason didn't care. He sat with them, listening to them talk over each other, laughing as they bickered, promising himself once again that no matter how wide their world got, this kitchen table would always be the center of it. After dinner, they sat on the floor, flipping through photo albums. There were pictures of scraped knees and birthday candles, of snowball fights and Ellie's first school play, of Mason holding a newborn kitten named Button, who never quite liked him. At the back of the album, tucked into a plastic sleeve, was a photo they hadn't seen in a while, a grainy security camera still from the corner of a building, showing a boy reaching up toward a man in a long coat. "That's where we started," Mason said, voice low. Liam nodded. But not where we stopped. Ellie leaned her head against Mason's arm. No, she said softly. We're just getting started. They sat like that for a long time, no words, just the hush of the city through the open window and the slow, steady beat of belonging. And outside, the street where it all began shimmered under the last light of day, no longer just a sidewalk, but a landmark in a map of miracles. Because a boy once asked for milk, and what he got was a family. By the time the heat of August crept into the corners of the apartment, the Rourke family's life had taken on the kind of rhythm that used to belong only to other people. Breakfasts with toast slightly burned, Liam's camera bag left in the hallway again, Ellie's sunflower seeds now grown tall in the small shared garden out back. Mr. Sprinkles the cat, eternally annoyed at being left out of everything, claimed the sunniest spot near the window like a throne. But more than that, what filled their home was normal. Predictability. Safety. The kind of peace you only notice when you've lived long stretches without it. On a warm Saturday morning, Mason sat at the kitchen table sorting through Liam's photographs. They were laid out across the surface like puzzle pieces, each one telling its own silent story. An old man sweeping his stoop at dawn, a little girl watching a pigeon with fascination, the crumbling brick of the alley behind the old church where Liam and Ellie had once curled up on freezing nights. "They're beautiful," Mason murmured, picking up one of the photos, a close-up of a girl's hand pressing against the frosted window of a city bus. "They're honest," Liam said, arms crossed as he leaned in the doorway. "I didn't want pretty, I wanted true." Mason looked up. "That's why they're beautiful." Liam hesitated, then added, "The shelter art coordinator wants to hang some in the entry hallway. They said it might help kids coming in, to see something that feels familiar, like they're not starting from zero." Mason nodded slowly. "You should let them." Liam trailed off. "What if people look at these and see pain, not strength?" Mason leaned forward, fingertips resting on the photo. "Then that's on them, not on the art." That night, as twilight seeped in through the curtains, Ellie climbed onto Mason's lap with a folded sheet of paper clutched in both hands. "What's this?" he asked. "My homework. We had to write about someone we admire." She unfolded the paper carefully and cleared her throat, though her voice was barely more than a whisper. "My hero is my dad. I didn't always have one, but then he came and helped my brother and helped me, and stayed even after we were safe. He didn't stop loving us once we stopped needing help. That's what makes him a hero, not because he saved us, but because he stayed." She looked up. "Is that okay?" Mason couldn't answer right away. His throat was tight. His eyes burned. "It's perfect, miss," he whispered. At the end of August, they returned to the sidewalk where it had all started. Not because they needed to, but because Liam asked. He brought his camera. Ellie brought a bag of bagels to hand out. Mason brought nothing but himself. The street hadn't changed much. Still loud. Still busy. The same coffee cart on the corner. The same cracks in the pavement. But Liam stood taller now, his shoulders broader, his gaze steadier. He didn't flinch when someone brushed past him. He didn't lower his eyes. He took a photo of the crosswalk, then one of the bus stop, then the spot marked by memory where he had once looked up at a stranger and offered to clean his shoes. "Feel smaller now?" he said quietly. Mason put a hand on his shoulder. "That's because you've grown." They sat together on a nearby bench, watching the afternoon rush swirl around them. Ellie chatted with a woman and handed her a bagel. Mason leaned back against the bench, one arm draped over Liam's shoulder. "I've been thinking," Mason said. "Dangerous." Mason smirked. "I think we should do something with the story. Not the flashy version, not the headlines, just the truth. For schools, community centers, maybe a video, something that reminds people to see kids like you." Liam considered that. "As long as we own it, not them." "Agreed. And Ellie gets a say." "She'll demand a producer credit," Mason said. They both laughed. By the time they headed home, the sun was dipping behind the skyline, painting gold into every window pane. Ellie dozed off on the subway ride back, her head against Mason's side. Liam stared at the flickering lights in the tunnel, lost in thought. "I'm glad you didn't walk away," he said. Mason looked at him. "Me too." And he meant it more than Liam could know, because the day he stopped for a boy with a spray bottle and hungry eyes had changed everything. Not just for Liam and Ellie, but for Mason himself. It had pulled him out of a glass tower and dropped him into something far richer, messier, real. Fatherhood wasn't polished shoes and birthday gifts. It was hard questions, burnt pancakes, apologizing when you raised your voice, sitting quietly beside someone who didn't know how to ask for help. It was seeing and choosing every day. Mason had once been the man everyone wanted to be. Now, he was the man he had once desperately needed. Because when a boy offered to shine his shoes, Mason hadn't just seen poverty, he'd seen himself. And what happened next didn't just stun the city. It saved them all. Autumn faded into the gentle hush of winter once again. This time the season didn't arrive with hardship. It came like an old friend, familiar, quiet, steady. Snow fell in soft layers across the windowsills of the Rourke apartment, and the city outside moved at half its usual pace, blanketed in white. Inside, the glow of orange lamps and the quiet melody of music from Ellie's tablet filled the rooms. Life hadn't gotten easier exactly. The world still held its shadows. Liam had days when his thoughts got heavy, when memories of cold nights or hunger crept back into his mind uninvited. Ellie still had nightmares sometimes, less frequent, but always followed by crawling into Mason's bed and whispering, "I just needed to know someone's still here." But the difference now was that someone always was. Mason no longer wondered what his life might have been if he hadn't stopped that day on the street. He knew. It would have been full of numbers and polished meetings, of goals reached and never really felt. It would have been hollow, brilliant on the surface, but empty underneath. Instead, it was filled with Liam's photographs tacked to the fridge, Ellie's drawings taped to every wall in the hallway, a calendar cluttered with family nights, school events, soup kitchen volunteering, and dentist appointments, and the book. Milk Money had been quietly published through the Foundation's educational imprint. No bestseller campaign, no press tour, just something honest, something real, a story written not to impress, but to impact. The first shipment had gone to 60 schools, then 200. Soon, requests began pouring in from across the country. Kids saw themselves in Liam, in Ellie, in the little quiet moments that didn't scream but whispered, "I see you." One day, a teacher in Ohio wrote, "My fifth graders don't read anything, but they read this." And one of them told me he no longer felt invisible, that he's going to ask for help. Mason forwarded the message to Liam. Liam didn't reply in words, but that night he printed the email and pinned it above his desk. As the one-year mark approached, the anniversary of the day Mason met the boy who changed everything, they didn't plan anything grand. Just a small dinner at home. Spaghetti, garlic bread, a terrible attempt at salad, and a simple cake Ellie decorated herself with wobbly blue frosting letters, "To the day we became us." They ate slowly, laughing too much, and after dinner they sat on the floor in a circle and opened a single envelope Mason had placed in the middle of the table. Inside were 3 letters, one for each of them. He had written them months ago, unsure if he'd ever give them, unsure if he could have, but tonight felt right. Liam opened his first. His hands shook as he read. Mason had written, "You taught me how to listen again, how to slow down. You reminded me that we don't save people by fixing them. We save them by staying. Thank you for letting me stay." Ellie's letter said, "You brought color into the world. I didn't know had gone gray. Your joy became mine. Your laughter healed something I never realized was broken. I never knew what it meant to be someone's dad, until you looked at me like I already was, And Mason's letter to himself. You were lost, but you were never beyond redemption. You just needed to stop running long enough to let love catch you. They didn't talk much after reading. They didn't need to. Later that night, Liam stood in the doorway of Mason's room. I was thinking. Mason looked up from his chair. Dangerous? Liam smirked. I want to go back, not just to the sidewalk, to the shelters, the church, the places we used to hide. Mason nodded slowly. To remember? To remind, Liam said. There are still kids out there, still me's, still Ellie's. Maybe we can be the ones to stop now. Mason stood. We already are. That weekend they visited the shelter where Ellie had first received socks with the rubber dots on the bottom. Ellie brought new ones in every color. Liam brought a framed photo for the office, a street corner, and a caption. The day everything changed. They didn't make a speech. They didn't sign autographs. They just listened, hugged, held space. And as they left, Liam looked at Mason and said, Do you think it's okay that I'm happy now? Mason blinked. I think it's because you're happy now that others might believe they can be too. Spring bloomed again, and on the second anniversary of the day, everything changed. Mason received a card. No return address, no signature, just a scrawled message. I saw your book. I was the kid behind the deli on 14th. I read your story. I asked for help. Someone said yes. You gave me the courage to ask. Mason folded the card and placed it in his journal between pages already filled with dates, sketches, ticket stubs, and stories yet to be told. He walked into the living room where Ellie was building a puzzle and Liam was sketching their cat in a Batman cape. Guys, he said. They looked up. Want to write the next book with me? Ellie beamed. Only if I get the first page. Liam raised his pencil. Only if we call it The Family Who Stayed. Mason smiled. He sat down beside them and opened a new page. Liam turned 13 that spring. The age landed like a quiet shift, more noticeable in his voice than in his words. He still read every night, still photographed alleyways and overlooked corners of the city, but now there was more depth in his photos, more shadow, more light. Ellie, for her part, was deep into her sunflower campaign. She planted them in yogurt containers, paper cups, old coffee tins, whatever she could find, and passed them out to anyone who looked like they might need something beautiful. Mason watched them grow and change with the quiet pride of someone who no longer feared impermanence. They weren't going anywhere. This life, this family, they were stitched together now. Not by the emergency of survival, but by choice, repeated every day. At the start of summer, Liam received a letter, a scholarship, photography mentorship program, city-sponsored, only 10 kids accepted. He stared at the envelope on the kitchen table for a full minute before speaking. They picked me. Ellie screamed. Mason didn't. He just stepped forward and pulled Liam into a hug. Of course they did. I'm scared, Liam admitted into Mason's shoulder. What if I mess it up? You won't. But if I do, then you'll still come home to us. That summer, Liam took the train alone 3 times a week to the art studio in the city's creative district. He carried his camera, his sketchbook, and a small note Mason had folded into his pocket the first day. It read, See what others miss. Tell their stories. Come back to us. And Liam did. Every time. Ellie started writing poems, silly ones at first, then ones with more gravity. One morning, she slipped one under Mason's coffee cup. You stopped when no one else did. You stayed when others wouldn't. You saw us. And now, we see you. Mason kept it in his wallet. That August, they returned to the spot where it all began, the sidewalk where a boy once asked to clean a stranger's shoes. This time it was Liam who asked to go, not with dread, with reverence. He took one photo, just one, not of the building, not of the street, but of his younger sister standing there, head tilted, the skyline behind her, holding a single sunflower. That's the one, Liam said. The one for what? Mason asked. For the cover of the next book. Ellie clapped. What's it called? Liam looked at both of them, then at the sky. What love built. Back at home, they hung the photo in the hallway, beneath the original one, grainy, security footage, long ago. Above it, they placed a plaque, just one line, started with milk, ended in family. On a rainy September night, Mason stood at the stove stirring sauce while Ellie sang in the background and Liam edited photos. The window fogged with steam. The smell of garlic and tomato filled the room. The cat snored on the couch. And Mason thought, this is it. Not the gala nights, not the boardroom, not the donations. This. A boy who found his voice, a girl who found her joy, and a man who found his heart again, quietly, unexpectedly, on a street he'd walked 1,000 times before, never knowing the moment would come when someone would finally make him stop and stay.